The question that has echoed through temples, libraries, and secret courts for centuries is this: who truly gave birth to the Anunnaki? Imagine standing before an ancient tablet, its clay pressed with symbols that whisper of divine descent, and realizing that the stories we've inherited may have hidden the real architects of heaven itself. Welcome to Tales of Mythology, where ancient legends, forgotten horrors, and supernatural wars come to life. If you love exploring the untold side of mythology, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell below so you never miss another legendary story. Origins. Across the lands of Sumer, the ancients carved not metaphors, but declarations into stone. The eight-pointed star, stamped again and again on clay, was more than an ornament. It was a cosmic signature. It proclaimed that divinity came from above, and those who bore its mark descended from celestial realms. Kings later inherited this very symbol, embedding it into their coats of arms and emblems, claiming the right to rule by aligning their bloodlines with the heavens. In the old Sumerian language, the cuneiform sign Dinger preceded the names of gods, but it was not restricted to deities alone. It extended to all who carried heavenly origin, making the line between ruler and god a thin one. The family of heaven was not a metaphor. It was lineage, inheritance, and the echoes of dynasties written among the stars. As the scholar Samuel Noah Kramer reminds us, history begins at Sumer. The Akkadians refined this vocabulary into the word Ilam, and from their Hebrew traditions drew El and Elohim. But let's be precise, Elohim is not singular. It is plural, an assembly of forces, entities, or divine presences. Over time, however, translations stripped the plurality away, collapsing it into a single omnipotent God. Yet, the ancients never spoke of one. They spoke of many, arranged like families, councils, and courts. Anu, the High Sky Father, presided not as a creator ex nihilo, but as one who inherited his station within an already existing genealogy of power. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, even the gods themselves emerge from the mingling of primordial waters. Authority in heaven mirrored authority on earth, succession, hierarchy, delegation. As Gwendolyn Leake writes in ancient Iraq, the gods of Mesopotamia were conceived in human terms, born, living, and dying in a divine society as complex as that of man. These divine councils found parallels across cultures. The Greeks gave us Zeus, commanding thunder from Olympus. The Vedic hymns praised Dyaush-Pitar, the shining sky father. The Canaanites revered El, patriarch of the divine council. All are iterations of the same archetype, a ruler from above, presiding over order, justice, and fate. But here lies the twist: none of these figures claim to be the ultimate source. They too were heirs, products of lineage embedded in genealogies that stretched back into the unseeable abyss. Their powers were derivative, their authority borrowed. The gods were not creators, but administrators, just as cities were governed by kings and palaces filled with dynasties. So too was heaven imagined as a celestial monarchy. The divine was political because politics was divine. To understand the Anunnaki, we must see them not as isolated beings, but as the cosmic reflection of earthly order. The Maltese cross, echoing through royal insignia, and the crown symbols of European dynasties are not random relics of artistry. They are inherited emblems pointing back to Anu, to the star, to the throne above all. When British monarchs embedded crosses into their regalia, or when emperors of Rome stamped stars upon their standards, they were not inventing new symbols. They were recycling ancient signatures of power that legitimized their rule as echoes of heaven. The family of Anu had become the family of kings. In this sense, every coronation was not just a political ceremony, but a reenactment of celestial order. Authority was sacred because it claimed to be descended from above. As Mircea Eliade once noted, for archaic man, the real is the sacred, and the sacred is real. But here comes the unsettling truth: divinity in the ancient world was never moral perfection. These beings loved, hated, betrayed, seduced, destroyed, and created all in one breath. Enlil could bring life and floods in equal measure. Inanna could seduce or annihilate with the same hand. They were mirrors of human complexity, amplified on a cosmic scale. The gods were not neat, sanitized forces of good or evil. They were chaotic, dangerous, magnificent, and the real power of their stories lies precisely in that paradox. By projecting human struggles onto divine councils, the ancients revealed their belief that the world itself was governed not by one all-good God, but by many conflicting wills. Morality was not absolute. It was circumstantial, fluid, negotiated among beings with conflicting agendas. As Jean Bottero remarks, Mesopotamian gods are not the guardians of morality, but of cosmic order. From this perspective, the rise of monotheism was less revelation and more revolution, a deliberate consolidation of plurality into singularity engineered for political and social control. Polytheism represented diversity, multiplicity, and shared governance. Heaven was a parliament, not a throne. But over centuries, the assembly was dismantled. One god replaced many. The divine council became a singular sovereign. What was once plural was rebranded into unity. This transition was not about truth, but about authority, a convenient way to enforce loyalty to one king in heaven as on earth. The echoes of Elohim's plurality still whisper through Genesis, "Let us make man in our image," a phrase that exposes the lingering traces of a council erased by theology. As Karen Armstrong observes in A History of God, monotheism was not discovered, it was invented, an answer to the political needs of its time. And yet, beneath the grandeur of kings and the myths of gods, a question lingers: if Anu did not create, if Enlil only governed, if Inanna reflected desire and destruction, then who or what birthed them all? The ancients themselves pointed back to waters, to chaos, to something deeper than deities, an ineffable source beyond names and thrones. The gods, it seems, were not the origin, but the heirs, inheriting their domains, just as monarchs inherit crowns. And perhaps this is the secret thread tying together the Sumerian tablets, the royal insignia, and the councils of heaven and earth. Authority is always inherited, never absolute. Anu springs not from nothingness, but from Anshar and Kishar, themselves born of Tiamat and Apsu. Each stage of mythology is creation by descent, not a sovereign act. The Anunnaki are heirs of a lineage, administrators of celestial order, not architects of existence. Authority. Religion in the ancient world was never simply about worship. It was a scaffold upon which entire civilizations built their sense of order, control, and legitimacy. When Hammurabi of Babylon carved his law code into stone, he began not with legal rules but with divine authority. He declared that Anu and Enlil had named him to bring justice to the land, binding the concept of law to the will of gods. By invoking Marduk as his protector, Hammurabi ensured that disobedience to the king was not just a crime against the state. It was an act of rebellion against the divine. This fusion of temple and throne was not accidental but strategic. As cities grew, so did the need for systems of hierarchy, and religion offered the most powerful justification. Kings could present themselves as deputies of heaven, priests as mediators of cosmic will. Authority was never presented as human invention. It was sanctified lineage. As Henri Frankfurt observed in Kingship and the Gods, to the Mesopotamian, the king was not only a political ruler but the representative of cosmic order. From Mesopotamia to the banks of the Nile, rulers understood that the divine was the most effective tool for shaping loyalty. Pharaohs of Egypt proclaimed themselves sons of Ra, bridging the human and the celestial in their very bodies. In Canaanite traditions, rulers drew legitimacy from El, the high father of the divine council, and later from Baal, the storm god who brought fertility and victory. The same mechanism echoed in early Israelite society, where Yahweh was not immediately recognized as supreme, but gradually elevated as the central protector of the tribe. His worship was not born of sudden revelation, but of political necessity. When small tribes faced threats from larger empires, unity was survival. A singular god became the symbol of collective identity, consolidating what had once been shared among many. This shift from multiplicity to exclusivity was a deliberate restructuring of theology to match the demands of governance. The Hebrew Bible itself reveals this evolution when read carefully. In early texts like the Song of Deborah, Yahweh appears as one God among many, a warrior deity tied to specific territories such as Seir or Edom. Only later, in prophetic writings shaped by political reforms, does Yahweh begin to assert himself as the one true God. The reforms of King Josiah in the 7th century BCE are particularly revealing. He destroyed rival shrines, centralized worship in Jerusalem, and rewrote religious practice into monotheistic terms. These were not acts of theological purity, but of political consolidation. The priesthood of Jerusalem gained immense power by promoting Yahweh alone, erasing other deities from official memory. As Mark S. Smith writes in The Origins of Biblical Monotheism, the elevation of Yahweh to supreme status was less an act of revelation than the outcome of centuries of theological competition and political necessity. What followed was a rewriting of divine identity itself. Yahweh absorbed the attributes of El, becoming a fatherly creator. He took on the roles of Baal, riding the clouds and commanding storms. Asherah, once understood as the consort of El, was briefly paired with Yahweh, as inscriptions from Kuntalit Ajrud show. However, she and other divine figures were erased from the canon. The result was not merely religious innovation but a suppression of competing traditions. Monotheism emerged not as a discovery of truth but as a narrowing of divine plurality. Through this lens, the Bible becomes not just sacred scripture, but a political document, a carefully curated collection of sources compiled over centuries to enforce one theological vision. Each source, the Yahwist, Elohist, Deuteronomist, and priestly, reflects competing ideologies woven into a singular narrative that obscured its plural origins. The deeper implication is stark: the God of religions, as we know him, was not the original. He was constructed, shaped, and consolidated over generations of political struggle and cultural engineering. The Gnostic texts later identified this God not as the true source but as a demiurge, a craftsman of matter who proclaimed himself the sole creator. In these writings, he was called Yaldabaoth, Soklas, or Samel, names that dripped with contempt. He was seen as ignorant, blind, arrogant, an impostor who trapped souls in material existence while claiming to be the only God. As Elaine Pagels explains in the Gnostic Gospels, the creator whom others worshipped as God was, for the Gnostics, a false god, a blind craftsman ignorant of the source from which he came. This concept was not entirely unique to Gnosticism. Plato described a demiurge, but his was a rational craftsman shaping chaos into order, not a flawed tyrant. Aristotle took it further, envisioning an unmoved mover, perfect and eternal, setting all things in motion without being touched by time. These philosophical traditions highlight the same underlying theme: creation is derivative. It comes not from ultimate essence, but from beings who themselves are shaped by forces greater. Still, when we apply this lens to the Anunnaki, the pattern becomes undeniable. They too are administrators, descendants, heirs of cosmic ancestry, not architects of existence. Authority in heaven and authority on earth both emerge from the same principle: legitimacy is inherited, not absolute. As the Nag Hammadi library records in the Apocryphon of John, he said, "I am God, and there is no other beside me, for he is ignorant of his strength and the place from which he came." Religion, then, becomes a mirror of politics, and politics a reflection of religion. Both rely on authority anchored in ancestry and legitimacy. When thrones are crowned with stars and crosses, they are not creating new orders but recycling symbols that stretch back to the heavens. The Maltese cross carried by monarchies, the star embedded in insignia, the divine names inscribed on clay, all are echoes of that same claim. Power is sacred because it is inherited from above. Yet, the more we examine these inheritances, the clearer it becomes that they do not point to a single origin, but to a chain of succession. Just as earthly rulers rose and fell, so too did gods, each inheriting authority, each bound within genealogies older than memory itself. The God of religions may be mighty, but he is not the origin of origins. Yahweh's elevation to supreme status mirrors the demiurge's claim: crafted, consolidated, authoritative, but not absolute. Cosmogony. The ancient civilizations never imagined the world as suddenly appearing from nothing. Their myths, carved into clay or preserved through chance, spoke of endless waters, boundless darkness, and hidden potential. For the Babylonians, creation began with mingling depths: Tiamat, the salt sea, and Apsu, the fresh waters beneath the earth. From their union came the first divine generation, whose noise and vitality threatened to overwhelm their parents. Apsu sought to silence them, but Enki struck first, killing him and unleashing fury. Tiamat rose against the younger gods, birthing monstrous forces of chaos. Then came Marduk, the storm god, who battled her in a clash that shook the heavens. From her broken body, he fashioned the sky and land. From her blood, he drew forth life itself. The Babylonian Enuma Elish thus presents creation as violence, order carved out of destruction, a universe born not from nothing but from the body of chaos. As Stephanie Daly notes in Myths from Mesopotamia, the cosmos was a divine victory over primordial disorder, the act of reshaping death into structure. On the fertile plains of Egypt, creation was told differently. Here, the abyss was not hostile, but fertile. It was none, the infinite ocean of potential, neither malevolent nor benign, simply the endless backdrop of being. From its depths, a mound emerged, the Benben stone, and upon it arose Atom, the self-created one. Through gesture, breath, or even union with his own shadow, he produced Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. From them were born Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, and thus the great family of Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys unfolded. This story was not one of conquest but of unfolding, where creation flowed like cycles of the Nile. The Egyptian cosmogonies emphasized balance, renewal, and continuity. They saw the origin of the world as cyclical harmony, not as divine warfare. As Jan Assmann explains in The Search for God in Ancient Egypt, creation was not a beginning but an eternal recurrence, a cycle where chaos was forever balanced by order. In India, creation was neither conquest nor cycle but rhythm. Hindu thought placed Brahman at the center, the ineffable absolute beyond name or form. From Brahman emanated the divine functions, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, Shiva the destroyer. Together, they represented not one act of creation but an eternal dance where universes were born, sustained, and dissolved in endless ages. The cosmic cycles stretched across kalpas, vast spans of time impossible to measure. Time itself was circular, where death fed birth and destruction prepared the ground for renewal. Creation was not a singular event but an infinite pulse, the breath of the universe itself. As the Rig Veda proclaims, there was neither being nor non-being then, only the one breathed without breath, self-sustained. This vision contrasted sharply with Western notions, presenting creation as a rhythm woven into eternity. The Greeks, too, peered into the abyss and imagined chaos as their beginning. Hesiod's Theogony describes a yawning gap from which emerged Gaia, the earth, Tartarus, the deep abyss, and Eros, the force of attraction. From Gaia's union with Uranus came the Titans, Cyclopes, and giants, beings of immense power whose struggles would shape the cosmos. The succession of Uranus, Cronus, and finally Zeus reflects a world where creation unfolds through conflict, generational rivalry, and the assertion of power. The divine order of Olympus was not eternal, but achieved, won through battles that mirrored human dynasties. Creation here was not transcendence but genealogy, where each new generation displaced the old. As M.L. West observes in Theogony, Greek cosmogony is a sequence of usurpations, a drama of divine succession. Later, the Hebrew tradition of Genesis reshaped these ancient echoes into something new. The earth was formless and void, with darkness upon the face of the deep. Yet here, there was no pantheon, no genealogy, no cosmic battle. Instead, one God spoke creation into being, light, sky, land, and life unfolding in ordered days. The myth carried the language of earlier traditions, chaos, waters, division of light and darkness, but it reframed them into monotheism. Where Babylon celebrated Marduk's conquest of Tiamat, Genesis presented a solitary God bringing order with words. Yet traces of plurality remained, most famously when God says, "Let us make man in our image." The grammar itself betrays an older tradition, a memory of councils erased by monotheism. As Mark Smith has argued in The Early History of God, the Bible reworked older mythic patterns, stripping them of plurality to enforce a new vision of singular authority. Though their stories differ, the ancient cosmogonies share a profound similarity: creation is never absolute. It is always derivative, flowing from something that preceded it. Whether from waters, chaos, or the breath of the eternal, the gods themselves emerge within structures they did not create. Anu was born of Anshar and Kishar, who were themselves born of Tiamat and Apsu. The Egyptian Atum rose from none, the infinite potential. The Hindu Brahma emanated from Brahman, which remains beyond all gods. Even the Hebrew creator, despite claims of omnipotence, echoes older motifs and borrows symbols from earlier cultures. Creation in these myths is never the beginning. It is a continuation, a reshaping, an emanation from something older, deeper, ineffable. This realization forces us to confront the unsettling truth: the gods who claimed authority, whether Anu, Marduk, or Yahweh, were not ultimate origins. They were heirs of forces that preceded them, administrators of order, not architects of being. Their power was real but derivative, their authority inherited, not absolute. Beneath their myths lies a shared pattern: chaos, divine action, cosmos, and always the unspoken source hidden behind it all. And it is toward that source that the ancients pointed, even as later traditions tried to silence it. All creation stories point beyond creation to something prior, unfathomable, ineffable. The Hebrew God, the Creator, reflects not omnipotence, but lineage and ideas rooted in antiquity. Silence. At the end of every myth, when the voices of gods fade and the tablets of stone fall quiet, there is still a deeper question that refuses to die: what lies beyond the gods themselves? The Anunnaki, like the Olympians or the deities of Egypt, emerge within genealogies. They are not the first nor the last, but inheritors of something older. The Enuma Elish makes this clear. Anu himself descends from Anshar and Kishar, who are born of Tiamat and Apsu. This means the divine rulers we study are not the architects of existence but administrators of order, beings born from forces that precede even the heavens. The same pattern appears across traditions. In Hindu thought, Brahma, the creator, is not ultimate but only an emanation of Brahman, the boundless consciousness. In Hermetic writings, divinity is described as the all-sustaining reality through every breath and thought. The implication is unavoidable: the gods are powerful, but they are not the true source. As Spinoza would later write, God is not above or outside of substance. God is substance. When we follow this pattern, we begin to understand why so many traditions speak of primordial waters, or of silence, or of an ineffable presence hidden beyond creation. In Mesopotamia, the mingling of waters was the first condition. In Egypt, none was the eternal ocean from which Atom rose. In Greece, chaos was the yawning void, a nothingness teeming with potential. These were not poetic inventions, but metaphors of something humanity could sense but not fully describe. The ancients saw that behind every act of creation was another source, invisible and inexhaustible. Gnostic traditions named this the true Father, the hidden God who stood beyond the demiurge. Hermeticists called it the All. Mystics across centuries described it not as a ruler on a throne but as silence, as breath, as presence. To them, the divine was not an authority to be feared but the very ground of being itself, within which all life was already sacred. It is this silence that reveals the greatest deception: that the gods who demand obedience, sacrifice, and fear are not ultimate. They are projections, masks, intermediaries. For centuries, kings and empires reinforced their power by aligning themselves with these figures. Pharaohs were sons of Ra. Hammurabi invoked Anu and Enlil. Israelite monarchs claimed Yahweh as their tribal protector and national sovereign. Religion and politics became one, merging cosmic imagery with earthly authority. Yet beneath all these claims lies a more profound truth: that the true source never asked for temples, nor monuments, nor wars. It never demanded obedience or fear. The silence behind mythology is only whispers of unity, reminding us that separation is an illusion. This is why mystics often clashed with institutions. Where the priests and kings demanded loyalty to gods of law and conquest, the mystics spoke of freedom, intimacy, and remembrance. Consider the words preserved in Gnostic texts, where the demiurge proclaims, "I am God, and there is no other beside me," and is immediately condemned as blind and arrogant. Here lies the sharp distinction between the gods of religion and the true source. The gods create, command, and divide, but the silence simply is. The demiurge traps, but the hidden source liberates. In the writings of Valentinian Gnostics, the demiurge was not purely evil, only ignorant. attempting to copy perfection without ever knowing it. This ignorance produced a flawed world, yet within it remained sparks of light, fragments of the true divine essence. Humanity carried these sparks, and the task was not to worship the demiurge, but to awaken to the higher truth. In this framework, the real question was not how the world was created, but how we could remember the source beyond creation. As the gospel of truth declares, forgetting led to error. Knowing is freedom. From this perspective, the Anunnaki themselves are neither villains nor saviors. They are part of the chain, administrators of celestial realms, reflections of divine inheritance. They were remembered as descending from the skies, as powerful beings who walked among humanity. But their power was always derivative. They too carried the mark of descent, not of origin. To worship them as ultimate is to mistake the heirs for the source. This is why symbols like the star, the cross, or the throne persist across time, not because they point to the end of the search, but because they echo with fragments of memory. They remind us that kingship, divinity, and order are part of a lineage. But they also hint at the silence beyond it. To mistake the symbol for the source is to fall into illusion, but to follow the symbol to its origin is to encounter the unnameable. In this silence, creation itself is reimagined. It is not an act completed once, but an eternal emanation. The mother, father, and child of cosmogonies are not literal deities but principles of emergence, space, form, and life. The Trinity exists not to rule but to express the hidden source in movement. In Hermetic thought, the Father emanates forms through the Logos, the Son, into matter, the receptive canvas. This triad is not hierarchy but harmony, the dance of divine reality manifesting itself endlessly. The same idea appears in Hindu philosophy, where Brahman expresses through the triad of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Each tradition, though clothed in different language, speaks of the same mystery, the silent one becoming many, the many pointing back to the one. And in every case, the gods who govern are not the source, they are mere reflections of it. The real God is not a jealous monarch or a warrior thirsty for sacrifice. Nor can he be confined to he as a label of gender. The true divine is silence itself, pure presence, the very foundation of existence. He never needed to speak, for his being is complete in itself. His reality does not rely on temples or fear, because every breath we take already flows through him. The rivers, the stars, the laughter of children, and even the sorrow of loss, all carry the rhythm of the divine within them. This is the God beyond gods, not as a ruler above them, but as the deeper truth beneath all. Beyond Anu, beyond Yahweh, beyond Zeus, beyond every crown and throne, there is only the eternal, formless presence. As Plotinus wrote in his Enneads, the one is not this or that, but prior to all things. To realize this is not to discard the myths, but to look through them, to recognize that they are gateways, not barriers. For beyond Anu, beyond Yahweh, beyond every heaven and throne, lies only being, the nameless origin, without form, without time, closer than breath. And perhaps the end of all searching is not discovery, but a homecoming to what was never absent. A return to silence.